In 1995, the Kakapos stood on the edge of extinction, just 51 birds remaining. Remote predator-free islands were the last hope. This is the largest parrot on the planet. It weighs up to 4 kilograms, cannot fly, lives for up to 100 years, and smells of wild honey. For 60 million years, it existed without a single predator and never learned fear. When humans introduced cats and rats, the bird approached them with curiosity. Within a few decades, the population fell from thousands to 51. The predator-free islands seemed like salvation. The birds were safe. They were fed, protected, and monitored around the clock. But the real problem turned out to be something else entirely. For comparison, in 1995, more giant pandas were held in American zoos than kākāpō existed on the entire planet. 20 years before that, in 1975, ornithologist Don Merton found the last kākāpō of the Fiordland lineage in the mountains of Fiordland and named him Richard Henry. Why? In 1894, the naturalist Richard had single-handedly transferred 400 kākāpō to Resolution Island and lived there for years in isolation, protecting them. In 1900, stoats swam the strait. Within a few years, the island was empty. The 1995 program had learned the lesson. Islands were chosen far from the mainland, carefully cleared, every delivery controlled. The birds were moved to Codfish Island, Maud Island, and Little Barrier Island. Conditions were the best in the documented history of the species, but the birds refused to breed. First, rats. The program had not removed them immediately because they were not considered critical. They did not touch adult birds. But rats found eggs and newly hatched chicks with unfailing precision. Data showed rats were disrupting up to a third of all nesting attempts. Of the 12 chicks that hatched between 1980 and 1995 across all 3 islands, only a handful survived. The rats were removed. But even after that, the birds nested far too infrequently, and nobody understood why. The team provided more food, artificial pellets with every nutrient they could identify. The birds ate and barely nested. Years of research produced an answer nobody had expected. The kākāpō was waiting for a specific tree. Rimu, Dacrydium cupressinum, is a New Zealand podocarp pine that can live 500 years. Every 2 to 6 years, it masts heavily. And that is the trigger. A female kākāpō will not begin nesting until she has seen and eaten enough rimu fruit, regardless of how much other food is available. For a long time, this seemed like a behavioral pattern, a response to food abundance, logical. Provide abundance of other food and it will work the same way. It did not. Researchers at Massey University found the answer at the molecular level. Rimu fruit contains 8.4 milligrams of calcium per gram of dry weight, critically necessary for egg formation and a chick's skeletal development. It also contains both forms of vitamin D, vitamin D2, and vitamin D3. Until then, vitamin D3 had been considered exclusively animal in origin. Science believed plants could not synthesize it. Rimu synthesizes it. For a female forming eggs and raising a chick for months without any participation from the male, this is the most compelling explanation for why nesting does not trigger without rimu, even with full supplementary feeding. The program already supplies rimu fruit from other areas in poor fruiting years. Freezing alters cell structure and vitamin D3 concentration drops. Greenhouses produce fruit, but under different conditions of humidity and light, and the chemical composition differs. Rimu itself is being studied in parallel. Its fruiting cycle is linked to the accumulation of resources within the tree over several years. Accelerating this is not possible. Rimu does not hurry. The kākāpō along with it. But when rimu finally fruits heavily, the program learned that this too is not a simple victory. Codfish Island. Rimu was masting for the first time in several seasons. The program decided to maximize the outcome. Intensive supplementary feeding of all females to bring them into peak physical condition. A healthier female meant more eggs and more chicks. More chicks were born. But when the team tallied the sexes, 70% turned out to be male. In a species already carrying more males than females, the program had with its own hands deepened the imbalance. The mechanism proved to be evolutionary. The kākāpō is a species where males are 30 to 40% larger than females and require more resources to develop. A better-fed female is evolutionarily inclined to invest more in the more expensive to raise males, an ancient logic that works perfectly for a large, stable population and catastrophically for 51 birds trying to survive. The solution was counterintuitive: reduce supplementary feeding to the level at which the female was healthy enough to nest. At that ration, the sex ratio returned to approximately an equal split. This was the first time in history that the sex of chicks across an entire species had been deliberately adjusted through changes to the mother's diet. And it meant that rangers living on the islands for months now had to count calories more precisely than any nutritionist. Exactly what the bird would have found in nature, but without predators and without risk. The population grew by 39% in the 2002 season. It was then that the program first understood. They were reconstructing nature around the bird. But reconstructing nature meant also resolving a question that went beyond science. The kākāpō recovery program has from its first day been a joint project of the Department of Conservation and Whenua Hou, the Maori iwi, whose traditional territory encompasses the South Island. The kākāpō for them is taonga, a sacred species. Without their consent, rangers cannot carry out any intervention. In 2008, the Department of Conservation came to Whenua Hou with a proposal that sparked debate: artificial insemination of females using manually collected semen. Some tribal members rejected the idea as unnatural. Eventually, they were persuaded by the argument about whakapapa, genealogy. Eggs were simply failing to hatch because of excessive relatedness. Artificial insemination was an extension of lineage. The tribal council gave its consent. Since then, several females have produced chicks by males they would never have mated with in nature. Season by season, the population grew, but for the world to hear about it required one inconvenient bird and one BBC camera. September 2009. Stewart Island, a BBC film crew. Stephen Fry and zoologist Mark Carwardine had come to film a documentary series, Last Chance to See, about animals on the edge of extinction. They had come to photograph the Kakapos Sirocco, but Sirocco had other plans. He jumped onto Carwardine's head and began mating. Fry stood alongside, commented with British restraint, and could not stop laughing. A ranger tried to detach the bird. The bird paid no attention. The episode aired in October 2009. The video accumulated 30 million views. Within hours of the broadcast, Sirocco's Facebook page gained 750 new friends. Coverage of the kākāpō appeared in Britain's The Sun. The New Zealand Department of Conservation received a wave of inquiries and donation offers from people who had never before heard the word kākāpō. The Department of Conservation blog wrote at the time that they were stunned by the response from the British public. In January 2010, New Zealand Prime Minister John Key officially appointed Sirocco spokesbird for conservation, the official ambassador for the country's wildlife conservation, the first and only bird to hold such a position. But here's the detail that makes this more than just an amusing story. Sirocco is unfit for breeding. He was born sick. A severe respiratory infection at 3 weeks of age meant rangers raised him by hand. He grew up among humans and from that point considered them his species. When he was released among other kākāpō, he ignored females and sought out people. He attempted to mate with heads, feet, and backpacks. Scientists even constructed a semen collection helmet, a rubber device of the correct shape that volunteers wore on their heads. The results are in a cryobank. They may be needed one day. The program could have isolated Sirocco, removed him from sight so he would not complicate genetic records or interfere with operations. Instead, it made him a weapon. If one inconvenient bird cannot help the species with his genes, let him help with the world's attention. And he did. After 2009, funding and public interest in the program grew substantially. Articles about the kākāpō appeared in Japan, Brazil, and Sweden. Each new rimu season drew an audience that followed the chick count like a sports score. Sirocco is still alive. He is 29 years old. He no longer travels to public events. He lives on an island and runs social media through human representatives. But the work is done. Yet Sirocco is the exception. The rest of the program is built on the opposite principle. Not a bird that knows people, but people who know the bird. There is a detail about this program that appears in no press release. Every kākāpō has specific people who know it personally, for years, sometimes decades. Rangers do not rotate like officials. They return to the same islands, to the same birds, season after season. They know which females nest nervously and need quiet, who without difficulty allows a ranger to approach the nest at night, whose eggs have thinner shells, who is in what mood after rain. Ranger Jace, the name recorded in the Forest and Bird blog, recently walked 29 kilometers over 36 hours checking nests on the island. When he reached the tent where a journalist was waiting, he climbed in beside him and immediately fell asleep. He woke a few hours later and walked on. At night, he candled eggs with a torch from below. In a properly developing egg, you can see a mass of red, the embryo, and veins spreading from it like rays from an eye. He weighed the egg, he sketched it in a notebook. He placed it back in the nest with a surgeon's precision. Female Sarah sat on a branch above and waited. Deidre Verco joined the program in 2002 as an ordinary ranger when the population stood at 84 birds. Today, she is the operations manager of the entire program. 24 years with the same birds. Only the population has tripled. This season, the program launched a live camera feed from the nest of female Racura on Codfish Island. For 15 weeks, the whole world watched in real time as she sat on her eggs, tended her chick, slept, woke at night, and left to eat. Comments arrived from 50 countries. People set alarms for 3 in the morning not to miss the moment of hatching. That kind of attention to one nest of one bird of one species cannot be bought with advertising. It is earned with 24 years of work. From 51 birds in 1995, slowly with each rimu season. 2005, a few chicks. 2009, more. 2016, the population had doubled from its starting point. 2019, a record. 73 fledglings in a season. 30 females nesting twice thanks to egg substitution. The EGG substitution deserves separate mention. When a female settles on an egg, rangers sometimes replace it with a replica. The real egg is taken to an incubator with controlled temperature and humidity. The female continues to sit, not knowing that what is beneath her is a hollow plastic shell. The replicas are made by Whenua Workshop, the same studio that created props for The Lord of the Rings. They are printed on a 3-dimensional printer to the correct weight, and they contain a small speaker. At a certain stage, the egg begins to cheep, preparing the female for the arrival of a chick. When the chick in the incubator reaches the right age, it is returned. The female accepts it as her own. Artificial incubation increases egg survival rates and frees the female. In a rimu mast year, she may nest a second time. 2019 was supposed to be a triumph. Rimu fruited at record levels. 73 fledglings, the most in the program's history. And then aspergillosis appeared on Codfish Island, the fungus aspergillus present everywhere in the environment but lethal for kākāpō with their genetically narrow bottleneck. 21 birds were infected, 9 died. The program evacuated 51 birds to the mainland for treatment in zoos and veterinary clinics. 51, exactly as many as had remained in 1995. The outbreak was contained, but the epidemic demonstrated what geneticists had been warning for years. The entire population lives on a few islands and shares a common immunological vulnerability. One pathogen and 30 years of work under threat. In parallel, the program sequenced the genomes of all living kākāpō, one of the first times in history that scientists had fully sequenced the genome of an entire species, not a sample, but every individual. The conclusion was harsh: 36 unique genetic lineages. For long-term survival following a population bottleneck, a minimum of 50 is needed. The kākāpō is already below that threshold and will never cross it. Those 51 birds of 1995 were everything there was. All 235 alive today are their descendants. So the program manages evolution. Every pairing is planned with genetic profiles in mind. Eggs are moved between nests so that a female raises a chick with genetics as different as possible from her own. Some chicks are hand-reared and returned to the wild. February 14th, 2026, the first chick of the season, Tiuhiri A1. By the end of March, more than 100. In May, rangers drilled a tunnel through a rock outcrop to reach a chick in an inaccessible nest on Whenua Hou Island, the 106th of the season. The previous record, 73 in 2019, shattered. Where does such a result come from? In 1995, the program had only 20 females. 31 years of dietary management, genetic profiles, and selected pairings produced one simple number: 83 females of reproductive age today. 4 times as many, 80 nests, 256 eggs. The bird finally has enough females because people spent 30 years listening to what it said about food and about the sex of its chicks. The kākāpō accidentally changed global conservation practice. The island protection method, born as the only way to save one bird, is today applied on 300 islands around the world. 820 eradication operations, 666 islands. 88% successful. Dietary management, artificial incubation, whole population genome sequencing, standard practice for working with critically small populations from the black-footed ferret in the US to the California condor. All these methods were invented here, on Codfish Island, in response to specific failures. Every mistake became a publication. Every publication became a method for others. But the kākāpō itself was left with a problem no method can solve. 36 genetic lineages. That is the ceiling, and it is permanent. Those 51 birds of 1995 carried exactly as much diversity as had survived decades of predation. Humans can multiply individuals. They cannot multiply what does not exist. The program has reached the maximum that is possible at all. And now comes the hardest question. Deidre Verco said, "We want to create populations that thrive, not just survive. With each successful season, we aim to reduce the level of hands-on management." The program is already testing this on Whenua Hou Island. No nocturnal nest checks, no manual dietary adjustment. Early results are cautiously positive. This is precisely why the program took a step it had not taken in 40 years. 20 males were transferred to Sanctuary Mountain Mangatautari, a mainland sanctuary on the North Island protected by a 50-kilometer predator-proof fence. For the first time in more than 100 years, kākāpō on mainland New Zealand. Not a triumphant return to nature. Insurance. If disease destroys the island populations, there must be another group elsewhere. 6 of the first 10 birds climbed out over the fence on their own. The kākāpō climbs trees using its beak and claws, and a 6-foot metal structure did not stop them. They were caught, returned. The fence was modified. A second attempt was launched. The bird did what it had been doing for 31 years straight, showing where the next limit was. But the birds raised alongside rangers, whose eggs were substituted, whose pellets were swapped, who were candled in the dark with torches. What do they pass on to their chicks? What behavior? What memory? A kākāpō born in the program has never been wild, nor has its mother. Whether it will be able to live without humans 30 years from now, nobody knows. The program has no answer. Richard Henry lived on the program's islands for 35 years. He was the sole carrier of the Fiordland genetic lineage. All other kākāpō descended from Stewart Island birds. In 1998, on Maud Island, he fathered 3 chicks with a female named Flossie. These were his first offspring, and his only ones, because in his final years he stopped booming entirely. He sat quietly. He had gone blind in one eye. He waited. In December 2010, Richard Henry died on the island. Natural causes. He was approximately 80 years old. Don Merton outlived him by 4 months. He died on April 10, 2011. On February 14, 2026, the first chick of the season hatched on Pukenui Island. 4 years since the last. 235 birds, descendants of those 51. Everyone with a name, and every such night photographed.